Good evening all and welcome. Before we begin, I'd like to give a shout out to Lacey Noakes. Further to this, I would also like to remind you that I have a second channel called Mr. Knox, where you can check out other cool creepy horror videos that I create. You will find a link at the top of the description, and if you watch my videos and subscribe, I will love you forever. But for now, it's time to get comfortable. Lock your doors and windows, and let the darkness take control. I live in a very quiet and peaceful neighborhood, on a dead-end road. At the time, my aunt, who lived 2 houses down from my family, was having some issues with her kitchen sink. My father is very handy and can fix or build just about anything, so he agreed to check it out. My mother and brother were out, but I was about 16 years old at the time and was well accustomed to staying home by myself. It was broad daylight and during the summer. However, my father still said he would check on me from time to time. My father went to go fix my aunt's sink, and as promised, he did walk back home from time to time to see if I was all right. My room is on the 2nd floor of the house and in the left-hand corner. In order to see who comes into our house, I have to exit my room and peer down the staircase, which is directly in front of our front door. This is not far. The staircase is about 6 feet from my bedroom door, and every time my father walked in to check on me, I walk out of my room to see him and speak to him from the top of the steps. About an hour after the last check-in that my father did with me, I heard the front door open. Our front door is very old and has chimes on it. You can hear it open from any part of the house. As soon as my father opened the door, he called out to me and began asking if I was okay and if I was hungry. As I was conversing with him, I started to walk towards my open bedroom door so that I could go out onto the landing and speak with him easier. But as I was walking, my phone rang. I turned around and walked back to my bed to pick it up, and the caller ID just said, "Dad." I will admit upon seeing the caller ID I was a little perplexed, but then I figured my father might have butt-dialed me, as he'd recently gotten a new phone and the touchscreen was activated by other objects too. "Dad, are you calling me?" I called downstairs and decided to pick up the phone anyway. For no reason at all, I jokingly answered, "Hello?" I did not expect to hear my father on the other end of the phone say, "Hey, just finishing up over here. I'll be over soon." I fell deathly silent. I heard my father continue to speak with me on the phone, but I am also hearing my father, the same exact voice, speak to me from downstairs in the living room. I whispered into the phone, "Dad, where are you?" He proceeded to tell me that he was at my aunt's house, and that I already knew that. I would like to add that on the phone, in the background, I could hear my aunt and her kids. My father then asked me if I was hungry, and I'm now shaking uncontrollably, and in the background I hear our front door open and close. I'm sweating. My mind was working a mile a minute to understand what the hell was going on. While also being in a state of immense fear, I tell my father something along the lines of cutting it out, and that he just asked me that because he literally just walked out the front door. My father told me the last time he came back was around 1 p.m, and to tell him what I'm talking about. I have 15 steps in my house. It took me about 2 to leap down all of them and get out. I ran to my aunt's house with no shoes. I didn't even remember if I closed the door or not. I was shaking and in tears, and unable to explain what happened. I try not to think about it. I rented a cheap bi-level duplex in a bad neighborhood for 3.5 years so that I could save money to buy a house. First thing I did after unpacking and moving in was bolstering security. I changed the deadbolt on the front door and installed a locking doorknob in place of the crusty non-locking one that there was. All of the windows were old, crappy aluminium slider-style windows with horrible locks, and the back door was a patio door going straight onto a deck. So I bought a hardwood 1x4 and 2x4 and cut pieces to put in the windows and door tracks to stop any potential intruders who would have to break the window rather than simply opening one to gain entry. I'm convinced that a past tenant was a drug dealer. In the first 6 months, I had 4 separate instances of tweakers knocking on the door asking for Sam. A couple of the tweakers forlornly stepped off when I told them that no one named Sam lived there. Two others got worked up, asked where Sam had gone and where he was living, to which I responded that I had rented the place and had no idea who Sam was. After being visited by the tweakers, I redoubled my efforts to ensure that all doors were locked at all times, but I still forgot to lock the front door once in a while, and had a very creepy experience one night after forgetting to do just that. I was in the middle of cooking dinner one evening and went to the washroom. After washing my hands and exiting the washroom, I came back into my kitchen to see a middle-aged Asian man dressed in all black coming up the stairs from the entrance into my kitchen. "Who the hell are you?" I asked. Startling him, he said he was there to fix a toilet. I was sure I was going to die, but figured I ought to talk to the guy for a few seconds before lunging for a kitchen knife and fighting for my life. The guy explained that the landlord, Gary, had sent him to fix a toilet, and I told him that Gary wasn't my landlord and my toilets were working fine. He asked what address he was at. I gave him mine, and he started profusely apologizing, saying he had the wrong address. He backed down the stairs cautiously, put on his boots, and sheepishly left the duplex. I'm still not sure if he was looking for Sam to square up some unpaid debts, and when he realized that Sam wasn't there, if he was looking for a woman to prey on, but found me instead, and reconsidered his insidious plan, or if he was just some real poor sap who walked into a stranger's house on a mission to fix a toilet for Gary. But I never mistakenly left the door at that place unlocked again. I was staying with family friends when I was around 12 years old. Our parents had gone out together for the night. It was myself, my brother 9 years old, and two sisters of 13 and 9, who lived in the house. We were up late watching bad 80s horror movies and eating junk food. At around 1 a.m, the youngest sister made me pause the video so that she could go to the toilet. Less than a minute later, she came running back into the lounge room looking horrified. She blurts out that there is someone trying to get into the toilet window. Being the oldest child in the house, I pretended to not be afraid and go into the kitchen to grab a big knife. Then, the four of us slowly walked towards the toilet, thinking if there is someone there, they will quickly take off when they see the lights go on and voices in the house. So I turn on all the lights as I go through the house towards the toilet. I finally get to the toilet and turn on the light and poke my head around the doorway. Sure enough, there are two hands, carefully and quietly taking the loo window glass panels out one by one. We start yelling and pretending we are in full house with adults. This doesn't slow him down. There is about 10 panels, and 3 or 4 of them have now been removed. If he gets them all, he could easily just climb straight into the house. At this stage, I'm thinking maybe I should slash his hands, but I thought he could get the knife from me. I'm totally bricking it, but I'm trying to stay calm and pretend to be in control. The others at this stage are all whimpering and crying. I suddenly realize they have a dog in the house that's asleep in front of the fire. It's an old lab, but I didn't care. I ran into the lounge to pick up the dog, carry him into the toilet, and point his face at the window with the hands poking through it. The dog now goes completely nuts, barking and growling. The hands stop, and I'm hoping they disappear. Thankfully, the guy moves away from the window, and we spend the next few hours huddled together in the lounge with all knives in our hands and keeping the dog awake and sending him into the toilet every hour. Eventually, the parents come home and call the police, who came out and fingerprinted the outside of the toilet. Never heard anything from them. Certainly the most afraid I've ever been, though. I received a murder threat by phone once, and was followed by a black Cadillac wandering around by my house, only to stop later near me, followed by a guy with a machete walking in front of my house, trying to see if anyone was there. By the time the black Cadillac parked a few blocks away, I went over to my neighbor's house. They were the ones who called the cops, while I called my parents, as I was home alone at the time, and could barely talk since I was on the edge of crying the whole time. Nope, just some random guy trying to get money or whatever. It took me a few years to get over that. Growing up, my mum was a bartender. She was a single parent, so I took care of my little brother most nights. One night while I was making dinner, I kept hearing a strange whistling sound, but I didn't think too much of it, because it was storming pretty hard outside. But the whistling sound continued, and it started to sound more like a melody than whistling from a storm. I started to get a little freaked out, and asking my little brother if he was hearing it too. He wasn't. Eventually the whistling stops, but it's still storming pretty badly. Fast forward to the end of the night, when I'm going to bed. I'm climbing the ladder out of my bunk bed, and my TV shuts off. I think maybe the power went out, but the hallway light is still on. I try to turn it back on and nothing happens. So I reach around my TV stand and realize that it's been unplugged. At the same time I hear the whistling, only this time it's not in the distance. It sounded like someone was whistling directly into my ear. I could almost feel their breath. It sent chills down my spine. It still sends chills down my spine. At that moment I took off running out of the house screaming. We lived in an apartment with 3 other units, so I woke the neighbors above us. They were a younger couple with 2 kids and offered to come check out the house. I could tell at the time the guy thought I was just a stupid kid hearing things, but was trying to make me feel better. My brother and I waited outside of our apartment while he went inside to check it out for us. After a few minutes he came back. He seemed a little agitated and asked if we were playing a prank on him. This really scared me, and I told him we weren't. He could probably see we were telling the truth by our faces, because I could see the fear roll over his. He said he looked everywhere but didn't find anyone, but was convinced someone was in our home. They invited us to stay in their apartment until my mum returned from work, because they didn't feel comfortable with us staying alone. I never heard the whistling again, but so many other strange things happened to my brother and I in that apartment. I'm convinced it was haunted. My mum's best friend came for a visit. Her friend also brought her boyfriend too. He was weird, something was off about him. A week later, my mum's friend dumped him. He was so enraged, he brutally murdered her. When they were searching for her killer, my mum tipped them off that he was the one that did it. She was sure it was him. Came to find out, my mum unknowingly spent some time alone with her best friend's murderer in our house. I was around 15 to 16. My mum, stepdad, brother, and brother's girlfriend all went out to the local pub for maybe an hour before this happened. I was home alone with my twin. We're both female, and we had just been watching Mamma Mia. Classic. Right as the credits were on, we go and grab a snack from the kitchen, and I'm stood in the hallway when I hear a knock on the door. It must have been around 8 or 9. At the latest, so not even too late. Standing with his face pressed right against the window on the door is a 40-ish-year-old man. I freeze on the spot and watch as this guy tries opening the letterbox, and through it he bends down and says, "Hey little girls, let me in." I told my twin to get around the corner to the kitchen, and I noticed with absolute dread that the front door was not locked. I slowly made my way to the front door, taking slow steps and not breaking eye contact with the guy at all, and quickly put the chain on, as I did not have the key. At this point I ran back to my twin, and she was already on the phone with my mum. It was awful in that moment, as we were trying to whisper and tell them to come home, but she couldn't understand us at all. Soon enough she understood, and told my brother and stepdad, who were running back to us. Throughout this, the guy was still trying to talk to us through the letterbox, saying stuff like, "Please, let me in." And we were hiding around the corner with our dog and a knife. After about 5 to 10 minutes after hanging up, the pub isn't that far, I heard my brother and stepdad at the door, and they made sure we were okay, and told us they didn't see anyone at all. It could have been a drunk guy, but the horrible dread feeling just sank into me, and I knew this wasn't a good situation at all. I knew some of you may be shocked that I didn't call the police, but this was the first sketchy thing to happen to me, and it didn't spring to mind in that instance. This happened to me when I was 16, and on a site called Stickcam, which was a website chat site. Anyway, I ended up talking to some hackers on Ventrilo, and stupidly accepted a file from one of them. I don't remember what he said the file was, but I told them I'm going to take a shower, and when I come back, my webcam light was on. I knew right away, and felt very stupid. At the very least, mine had a light. One night when I was around 12 or 13, my parents were gone for a while, and I was just staying up really late, past midnight on my desktop computer, waiting for them to return. Like most people, I had been told a million times not to speak to strangers on the internet, but about half my friends list on MSN were people I had never met before, so I was chatting to a bunch of them. When out of nowhere, one of my online friends had told me exactly what I had been doing the past hour or two, e.g. that I had been eating, drinking, playing with, when I had gotten up last, things I had never mentioned in my chat. I instantly get a horrible feeling in the pit of my stomach. My desktop was set up in front of a big window, so as far as I knew, this person I had been talking to, that was supposed to live in a different country to me, had found my address and had been watching me through the window. Turns out, he had somehow hacked into my webcam, which I always left plugged in even though I had been warned not to when I wasn't using it, and had been frequently watching me through it whenever he wanted. It's been 10 years, and I still have all the cameras on my devices covered in thick duct tape. I live in a cul-de-sac. My bedroom is on the second story. I woke up one night around 3 a.m. to go to the bathroom. I knew we were expecting a lot of snow, and I looked out the bedroom window to see the accumulation. It was deep, like higher than the curb. A white blanket across the cul-de-sac. I decided to get some water, so I walked downstairs, turned on the light, and went into the bathroom and got water. I was downstairs for maybe 4 minutes, went back to my bedroom, and all the lights were out again. I looked out at the snow one more time. Within 4 minutes, there were now fresh footsteps leading from my house, across the cul-de-sac, and disappearing behind my neighbor's house. Never did find out what that was about, but I try not to think about it. A few years ago I was home alone. My husband was traveling out of state. I put on the news on the Samsung Smart TV in the living room, set the remote on the coffee table, and went into the kitchen next room over to make dinner. After a few minutes I noticed I didn't hear the sound of the news anymore, and I thought maybe the signal went out or the TV timed out and shut itself off. I come back into the living room, and the TV screen is showing a picture of a couch in a living room. My living room. Takes me a minute to realize the camera has been activated, and it's showing a live video of the room. The remotes were still on the table, so no chance the dog accidentally stepped on them and pushed buttons or anything. A few days later, news broke out that the Samsung TVs had a hacking issue. I guess the real mystery is how often I was spied on before I put tape over that camera. I was once at a barn alone. I'm standing there grooming my horse, and out of nowhere, I feel all the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end, and my fight or flight response kicks in. I turn around, and there's a guy I don't know standing in the doorway looking at me with a creepy smirk on his face. He introduces himself as the boyfriend of a woman who kept her horse at the farm and starts chatting and walking towards me. My normally very chill horse starts dancing around me nervously and moves to position himself between me and the man before the man can get to me. I noped out of there and literally got on my horse and galloped off into the woods. I 100% believe that man had very ill intentions. This happened to me a few years back, and is easily one of the most disturbing things that ever happened to me in my whole life. To give you context, I lived in a second-floor apartment my junior year of college, and to save money, I opened my balcony doors and windows and kept the air conditioning off. This particular week, my 75-pound dog, with a terrifying bark, happened to be staying with my boyfriend, and I forgot to lock my door. Terrible coincidence, right? Anyway, I woke up in the middle of the night. I happened to sleep naked, and I'm in my bed. When I open my eyes groggily, I see nothing less than a man standing in my bedroom. I had no clue what to do. I couldn't jump up because I was naked, so instinctively I yelled, "Yo, what are you doing?" His response was, I came to shut your doors and windows." At which point I noticed all of them were shut. He left, and I locked my door and cried. When I was around 11 years old, I was home alone one day over the summer, enjoying a bag of Skittles and watching TV. I tossed a bunch of them in my mouth and made them into a sort of ball of deliciousness. Then something made me laugh and I ended up swallowing it. The ball wasn't huge, but it was big enough to get stuck in my throat and causing me to be unable to breathe. It was terrifying because no one was home to help me and I began to panic. I remembered some cartoon or TV show where characters were being choked and slammed their stomach into the air to get it to pop out. So I started throwing myself into the side of this recliner we had, and even though I probably wasn't doing it completely right, it actually worked, and the Skittle ball popped out. It was still one of the most terrifying minutes of my life, because I thought I was going to die, and very well could have. It's still one of my biggest fears about being alone, choking when I'm eating something too fast, and not being found until days later. This happened to me when I was around 10 years old. I was just a kid babysitting my 7-year-old sister. We grew up near an insane asylum, and every now and then we would get an escapee in our yard. They'd walk off the grounds and head through the woods towards the nearest big town. They'd get about a mile to our place and realize walking 40 miles to the town was probably not happening, so they'd ask to use our phone and get picked up by the hospital. This happened every now and then, but this wasn't the first time it happened when I was home without my folks. So picture this, me home alone with my sister. The woman who arrived in our driveway wanted me to call the hospital to pick her up, but she also asked me if I had some matches, presumably to light a cigarette. I ushered my sister into the house and locked the doors as I called. The woman was kind of half screaming, half moaning. "Matches! I need matches!" Until they came and picked her up. I'm sure it was just for a cigarette, but it also could have been to burn us alive. So, I didn't end up giving her any. I was home alone after dinner, with my girlfriend, and around 3 a.m., I hear a very loud bang. My dog and I get out of bed to scope it out, hoping to find the reason for the noise. We searched for 15 to 20 minutes but couldn't find anything. We go back to bed and not 10 minutes later, there's a bang again. This time I'm shaking. It sounded like it was coming from the same spot, and I spent the rest of the night awake not wishing to move. The next day, I found out that my girlfriend put 2 sparkling Mortis in the freezer to cool them down, forgot about them, and left the house and never told me about them. They exploded, and they kept me up all night. This happened to me a few years back, when I lived out in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by woods and cornfields and whatnot. I was home alone late one night, and decided to step out on the porch for a late-night cigarette. I'm just there smoking away. and when I'm about halfway done, I take another deep drag, and when I blow out the smoke, it rolls around a face about a foot away from me. Needless to say, I tossed the cigarette away and noped back inside and locked the doors. It was about the closest I've come to a heart attack in my life. I had been watching a lot of really scary ghost stuff on TV when I was home alone, and went to bed thinking about it. Later that night I woke up in pitch darkness and heard a child singing or whistling in the room. I was frozen with cold sweats, ready to start crying. I remembered in the ghost stuff I watched, they talked to the ghost and made it better. I said, "Who are you?" all scary and shaky. My dog snorted and smacked her lips and went back to sleep. She had been snoring, and her damn nose was whistling. I have witnessed quite a number of creepy things happening in my life, but I'm going to share one with you that happened when I was 11. My parents and sister went shopping, and I was staying home with my dog. I was sitting in my room reading a book, with my dog sleeping on the floor, when suddenly the dog woke up and started gnawing at something in the corner of the room. At that time, I was sharing the room with my younger sister. Her bed was located right next to that corner, and there were a lot of toys and teddy bears on her bed. Thus, at first, I thought the dog was barking at a teddy bear or something. I grabbed the biggest teddy and gave it to the dog to sniff, telling it to calm down. The dog wasn't interested in the teddy whatsoever. She kept looking at the corner, gnarling and barking. All her fur was ruffled. This was the moment I realized something strange was going down. The dog started approaching that corner and attempted it about 3 times, jumping away, screaming in pain each time she got near enough, as if something had hit her. I almost crapped myself, yet managed to stay calm somehow, and started talking in a raised voice. "Whatever you are, leave us alone. I don't want you to scare me anymore." Believe me or not, everything calmed down at that moment. The dog approached the corner again, and this time without screams of pain, and was sniffing it nervously for a while. Yet there were no traces of anything there. I told my parents about it right away when they came back. I was shaken and told them to never leave me alone there anymore. I've checked that room, but they told me the dog must have barked at these toys. I'm pretty sure there was something there. The dog was always very calm and never acted that way, yet this time I think she was able to see or at least sense something that I couldn't. The underlying sensation was it was something evil or malevolent. I don't know if it's possible to label that. I thought, because the dog acted that way, something must have been hurting her, or not letting her approach whatever it was. One of the first nights I was home alone with my brother, I was probably 13 or so. My parents were at a concert and left me in charge of my little brother. So after he goes to bed, there's a banging at the door. I'm terrified and sneak to the window. It was a neighbor from up the road. We weren't friends. He's never been to my house before, and I'm wondering why the hell he wants to come in. I stood on the other side of the door and said, "My parents aren't home. I can't open the door." I know it's stupid. Never let strangers know there are no adults around. And he just yells back, "It's getting dark. I just wanted to let you know your garage door is wide open." I felt like a schmuck, but I'm still alive. I was at home one night. My mum was asleep, so I was basically alone. I was only 8 and was taking the trash outside after the sun went down, when a hand reached from the side of our back deck and grabbed my leg, trying to yank me. I screamed very loud, and they let go. I ran inside. I grew up in a ranch-style home in SoCal. I was still living at home while going to college, partly because of cost, partly because my mum needed assistance with her health. My dad was often out of town on business, so it was up to me to hold down the fort. Around 2 a.m. I wake up, instantly on edge. with this sinking feeling that something is in the house. It was a full moon, and the Santa Ana winds were blowing exceptionally hard. I sat up and listened closely for over a minute, but could only hear the rustling of leaves outside. I couldn't hear anything inside, but couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I finally mustered the courage to get up and investigate. I quietly opened my bedroom door and crept down the hallway, navigating only by the available moonlight. As I reached the end of the hall, I could hear the front door was open and slowly banging against a metal umbrella stand when I was hit by the most putrid smell. At this point, the adrenaline had me close to puking. It took all of my strength to get around the corner to the door. I slammed the door shut and start turning on every light I can find to begin looking around. My heart is pounding out of my chest as I go from room to room checking for an intruder. As I enter the dining room, I discover the source of the smell. Right in the middle of a rather expensive rug is what I later learned was a pile of partially digested figs. Turned out a coyote had gorged himself on dropped figs from our orchard and happened across the door opened by the wind. It entered the house and marked its newfound digs and likely fled when it heard me exit my bedroom. Before sharing my story with you, there are a few things you need to know to better understand it. First, I'm French, and this happened in the countryside where people don't necessarily lock their doors because they don't believe that anyone would come in without asking. So let me take you back to summer of 2019. I'm at a vacation property, a 2-story villa that is my mother's friend's. So, with him, my mother, some of her friends, I was staying in this house to rest before returning to work. After 5 days of being there, they decide to eat in a restaurant, but I opt to stay at home. They left, and I was downstairs eating my dinner and watching TV. I had at that moment a bad feeling, since I'd watched too many documentaries about sociopaths and stuff. I was thinking, something bad is going to happen. This house had what we call French doors, kind of big window doors that you can open. Anyway, after eating I decided to go upstairs and lock myself in my room. The bad feeling hasn't dissipated. But before that I went to check the door in front and behind the house. The problem is the door was open. As I said before, it was something normal here, so I didn't think it was a problem. The issue was that the door was unlocked. But like I said, this didn't really cross my mind to be an issue. I didn't think anyone would come in. Then I checked the windows. One was open, but I locked it, and I went back to my room. During the process, I could hear noises inside and outside the house, but since it could be auditory hallucinations, I had decided not to pay much attention to them. As I was locking up, I heard a few noises in and outside the house, but assumed they were just regular house noises and tried to put them out of my mind. After reaching my room, I called a friend of mine to have someone to talk to, and after an hour, she couldn't hear me anymore, as if the network had gone, which was strange because I'd never had a problem like this, so I began to panic. Because I had no one with me, nor my phone or laptop were working, and weird noises could still be heard. About 10 minutes later, I heard some people downstairs and my mother yelling my name, so I went down to see them, but I was really shocked. Why? I was the only one to have the door key. So how did they enter? 10 minutes later, I heard people speaking downstairs, so I came down and was speaking to my mum. I asked her how she got in, and she said that they managed to get in because I left the pool window open, when I was very sure I'd closed it. My mother thinks I was just paranoid, but I am convinced that someone made their way in and had a sneak around the house. I don't think anything was taken, but all those noises I were hearing and the fact that window was left open, to me confirms that something strange was happening that night. Before this story begins, I would just like to say that this story in particular isn't particularly horrifying or disturbing, but it would definitely make you angry, and I think that you'll enjoy it. I was riding home with my bike alone. because my little sister was at the dentist with my mum and my dad was at work. I live in this really small town, so never suspected anything like this would happen. I'm going to open my garage door because I only have the front door key. I rush to open my garage door, but I have to pee. So I go in, do my pee, and come back out to grab my bike. The moment I see it, I see a woman holding my bike and walking away with it like an 8-year-old. So I walk up to her and say, "Ma'am, please give me my bike back." And she goes, "Excuse me, young man, but this is our bike." I reply with, "How old's your kid?" "Why should I tell you?" I reply with, "Oh, I wanted to get this bike, I liked it, and sorry for trying to steal it." And she actually goes, "His name's Matt, he's 8. Ma'am, this bike is for 10-year-olds. I have to get my bike back or I'm going to call the cops." At this point she was shouting, "How dare you threaten me? This is our bike and you have no proof it's yours." I reply with a mild tone, "Ma'am, give me back my bike before I call the cops." And I do indeed have proof. And this woman starts screaming. And she says that she's going to call the police. And I start to fume. I tell her that I'm calling the cops on her for stealing my bike, and that say hello to jail. At this point, one of my friends are on his way home and sees me shouting at the lady. He also rides to school, and has rode with me a few times, so he knows very well it's my bike. Then he asks what's going on, and I explain. And he whips to me, "Call the cops, I'll distract her." So I walk into my home and call the police on my family phone, while calling my mum on my original. My mum doesn't pick up, and I think, screw it. The police answer, and I explain that there's a woman outside trying to steal my bike. She asks where I live, I tell her, and boom. Now she tells me the police will be there in about 10 minutes. I say thank you and hang up. I go outside and see this woman shouting at my friend. And my man is still speaking calmly to her. I see the kid cry out, "Mummy, I want the bike." And perfect timing. Amidst the chaos, the police arrive, and this woman has the nerves to say, "Thank God, the boys are trying to steal my son's new bike." The police says, "Do you have any proof, ma'am?" And she says, "Yes," and pulls out a receipt of some groceries with a bike bottle holder for her kid's real bike. Now this is where she messes up. I tell the officer I have the receipt for the full bike, head inside, grab a box, dig in it for 5 minutes, and ta-da, there it is. I rush out with it and show it to the officer. The officer says, "Ma'am, you screwed up on the first part. If you bought it an hour ago, excuse me, where are you heading? Home? Thought so. If you bought it about an hour ago and you're heading home right now, you wouldn't been able to have placed it on the bike yet." And boom, she's in cuffs. The officer asks me if my parents are home and I say no. He tells me to call them and I do. My dad comes home in half an hour, but my mum wasn't coming home for at least another hour. When my dad arrives, he spoke with the officer, and a week later we get the message the woman has been put in jail for 2 months and has community service for 5 weeks. She also had been found guilty of stealing candy for her sweet little baby and for assault. Apparently she slapped a kid's mum who wouldn't share their candy. Holy hell. That's the end of the story. My dad let me choose to press charges or not because I was the victim, not him. I have anger management issues, so I immediately said yes. I haven't been that boiling for months. Moral of the story, don't steal stuff or do other illegal things, guys. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's collection of Home Alone stories. I really liked them. And seeing as Home Alone is a Christmas movie, I thought it would be appropriate to release. Happy Tuesday, everyone. As I said at the start, I would really appreciate it if you would check out my second channel, Mr. Knox. Love to get that channel monetized, but it needs 1,000 subs and some views. So if you haven't seen it, it's really similar to what I do, just shorter content. And if you could, watch a video or two. Wait, there are only 2. If you could watch a video, no, I think there are 3 now. If you could watch one or all of those videos, that'd be great. And yeah, just let me know what you think. Your comments are really appreciated and valued. So that would be wonderful. Thanks, guys. All right then. I'd like to extend a huge thank you as well to my patrons, and members and supporters on Ko-fi. You guys are amazing, and I love you forever. Nearly Christmas, eh, guys? Well, I think it's time to wrap things up. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for tuning in tonight. Hope to see you again soon. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one on Thursday.